Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Jerry Kraft. And Jerry is an author and illustrator, and he does a lot of books for children, graphic novels, actually. Yes, new kid, class act. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you really describe what you write?
You know, uh, Even if they're not graphic novels, because I've self-published for like 1,000 years, but my goal was always to do kids of color as regular kids. Kids that are going to the movies, eating ice cream, going to the mall, have loving families, that kind of thing. So that's really like the base of everything that I do. That's the stock where all the soup comes from.
Aha, that's great. So you do comic strips too? Is that what
Yep.
I've heard?
So I did a comic strip called Mama's Boys. For like 20 years, it was syndicated weekly by King Features, and then I self-published my first Mama's Boys collection of comic strips back in 1997. That's how long I've been self-publishing, and then I did the next one 10 years later. So 1997, 2007, I did the third one about 4 years after that. So yeah, comic strips was kind of my really big thing, and that's what I had looked for years to be syndicated daily, like Peanuts and For Better for Worse, and those kind.
Aha. So what was your goal? What would you think you would want to draw people to these kinds of books?
This is the one I did back in '97. This is Mama's Boys as American as Sweet Potato Pie, and basically it was just um not only diversity. So to me, there's the diversity where they're just like, oh, let's show kids of color or characters of color. But then so many of the books that I saw with characters of color were depressing. They're sad books. They were either historical or you know really things about slavery and civil rights and police. And not that those aren't important stories, because they are, but it's not necessarily a book that a kid will grab and read 4 times on his own or on her own, like Wimpy Kid, or like some of Raina's books, or things like that. And so that's what I always wanted to do, was just have those kind of fun books that even a quote unquote reluctant reader would gravitate to, that it's not like a book just to do a school paper on or a book report on, just like a fun book.
Okay, that was really okay. What was the inspiration for your latest book?
So with this New Kid and Class Act, the inspiration was when I was a kid. Um, I lived in Washington Heights in New York City, born in Harlem, lived in Washington Heights. And, I was a private school kid. And I don't really see very many, pieces in literature or movies where it's an African American kid going to private school. It's usually a school where there are gangs and drugs and there are fights and all that kind of stuff. And I just wanted to go against the normal grain, that kind of single story narrative. And so I went to private school. So then I thought it'd be kind of cool, because now I'm a black kid whose parents, I wanted to go to art school. My mom and dad did not want me to go to art school because they thought I'd be living in their basement until I was 60. But I moved out a week ago, so I showed them. Uh, no, but like, I just wanted to show something that was different. And so I'm light skinned with straight hair, so I didn't look like my friends from my block. And then I got sent to Fieldston in Riverdale, where now there's 110 kids in my class, of which only 10 of us were African American. I didn't look like those kids either. So, just kind of like the daily things and going back and forth. And I've never heard the term microaggressions as much as when I look at reviews for these books. So I'm not even sure if I knew that that was a thing when I wrote the book. But, so there's nothing bad that happens that what I think people are used to with books with kids of color. There's just these like little things that are just like when they talk about death by a thousand paper cuts, a little poking and that kind of thing. But I also made it humorous so that you can kind of laugh while you're seeing these things.
What were the steps you took to bring it from initial inspiration to the finished book?
Well, that's a long story because I had always self published. And I remember having a meeting at Scholastic, and they were like, "Hey, do you have any ideas for a middle grade graphic novel?" And I hadn't really because didn't think of them necessarily for kids. I grew up with like the superhero stuff, and then I remember reading more adult books like Why I Hate Saturn by Kyle Baker and Malice by Art Spiegelman or some of the Will Eisner stuff. And they gave me a copy of Smile by Raina Telgemeier, and I took it home and it was like, wow, like this is it. This is really like something that I think I could be successful doing. And then I, started coming up with the idea for New Kid, which I had in my brain for like years. But the biggest drawback with that is I knew I wanted it to be big, but as a self-publisher, it would have been super expensive to print a book like that, a 250-page book in color. Um, and that was kind of it, and I just started sketching it and coming up with, the characters and writing it and rewriting it and decide what I wanted to do and the stereotypes I wanted to stay away from. So that was about 2014. That was like spring of 2014 where I first put pencil to paper. And then it was literally 5 years later where it actually came out in bookstores.
So, what kind of research went into writing the books?
Well, luckily, most of the research I had lived. I was the kid who was born in Harlem and grew up in Washington Heights and wanted to go to art school. My parents didn't want me, and they sent me to a school in Riverdale. So for 4 years, I went to a school called Fieldston in Riverdale, and that was ninth grade through 12th grade. And then when I had sons, we sent them to private school. And now I saw it as a dad. And they went from like beginners all the way through ninth grade. So now I got to see them go through the same thing. Um, and just seeing like what was different than when I was a kid, what was the same. um, we were able to prepare them a little better than I had been prepared. Like my parents, I felt just pushed me out the door, like, okay, see you in 4 years, good luck. But as parents, we definitely had more of a, okay, this is what may happen. When you're there and they start talking about Black History Month, don't be surprised if every kid in the class turns and stares at you to see your reaction. And a lot of those things did come true. My kids would come home like, yep, it happened. So most of those were just really loosely based on my life and my son's life that just kind of exaggerated. So it wasn't like when I've done some other books where I really have to like get a lot of research done.
Uh-huh. Were there a lot of changes between when you went and when your kids went?
Well, the biggest thing is social media because, we didn't grow up knowing that the most horrible thing that I could do to you is to unfollow you on Instagram. But, that obviously is part of my son's lives and kids today. So the whole social media aspect uh, is really big. And I think schools like are taking bullying more seriously. So I always have the school trying to do the right thing. Whereas, when I went to school back in the day, it's like, look, if you make it home and you still got your head on, you know, it's still literally attached to your shoulders that you're doing okay. They did their job. Um, So those are kind of like the main things. I do think that kids are a little more sophisticated and know a lot of different things where I mean we just watch Saturday morning cartoons. Now they're like streaming stuff and doing all that. So those are kind of the fun things that I kind of poke fun of.
Okay. And do you have any favorite research stories?
um a lot of it, um when class act, so after kids read New Kid, and again I had just really thought so hard about African American representation because that's what I thought was lacking, when I was a kid, and happy African American stories. And as I go places after New Kid and kids have read it, they're like, Miss Scrapp, how come there's no kids from India in your book? Miss Scrapp, how come there's no Muslim kid in your book? Miss Scrapp, and I'm like, oh wow. Okay, so there is a lot here that kids really want to see themselves represented. So I remember in Massachusetts, uh, meeting different kids, and just kind of sitting and talking and interviewing them. And that was it's interesting, and I tried to take as many I can and kind of, put that into the story. Even if they're just kind of marginal characters, but at least that they can see kids who look like them uh, involved in the story, I think has done a lot. And some of the kids are just like, "Oh my God, you did it! You did it!" So I have a great time with that.
That's
There's a girl
great.
I met in Massachusetts with alopecia. Uh, so she literally had no hair on her body, and I put someone like that in the book, just so kids understand, and everyone should be represented.
That's great. I love that you're taking um, your fans' advice. That's great. So, what is the biggest challenge in writing and putting out your latest books? And how did you overcome that challenge?
Well, the biggest challenge with New Kid was to do a book that talked about race that did not come off as angry and scare kids away. The biggest challenge with Class Act was following a book that had won a Newbery, a Kirkus, and a Coretta Scott King. So no pressure there.
None.
No. Um, yeah, I did not want to be seen as like, a one-hit wonder, or, he lucked out with his first book, or, so as a follow-up book, I wanted it to be confident, familiar enough where you have all the characters you love, but different enough where it didn't just seem like the same old thing. And I was fortunate that I achieved that. So now I'm working on the third book, which has to
Yeah.
follow, two books that made New York Times bestseller list, in the number one spot, and won these awards and did this. I was like, whew, okay, all right, let's stretch it out and relax a little bit and let's get cracking.
Now, that was my next question: is what else can we expect from you in the future?
Well, I'm definitely doing the third book. I have until February to complete that. And then, I just have so many ideas in my head that I can't sleep half the time. And then even now, I was talking to my son now, who's 23, and we just came up with something it's like, hey, wouldn't that be a great idea? Like, yeah, actually, that would be, and I wish I could start it now to be working on it with him, but I've got to give priority to the third New Kid first, and then when that's done, then I'll work on that. But I mean, I'd love to do picture books, all kinds of things. But when I tell you that these are extensive, like there were times when I was doing class act that I was like, yeah, let me knock off and let me go to sleep, and I leave my studio and it's like the sun's coming out and there's birds tweeting and stuff. And I'm like, wow, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Like I had no idea that I had literally stayed up and worked the entire night.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah.
So your kids actually did help you with the book, didn't they? The offenders?
Oh yeah. So with the offenders, so we wrote the offenders saving the world while serving detention. And that is five middle grade kids who are kind of bullies of their school and they get zapped, they get superpowers. But instead of looking cool, like Spider-Man or Black Panther or Captain Marvel, they like look like the kids they pick on. So my sons were in middle school at the time. So I'd read stuff to them, and they're like, nah, no kid would say that. I'm like, well, how do you know what a kid would say? You're just a kid. Wait a minute. I have two kids. I'm writing about that. So I actually put their pictures in. I made them co-authors, and we did book tours, and we were some of the first authors ever to sign at Jeff Kenny's store. Um, and yeah, they've kind of been with me ever since. It's been great.
That's great. Um, so I'm going to ask you now some questions on being a writer.
Okay.
What is your favorite part of being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process? And that in the writer and illustrator.
Um, the best thing to me is when I get emails from moms or teachers who say that their kid or some kid in their class has never finished a book and not only read it in one sitting or one day or 2 days, but then challenge them to read the book. They're like, Miss So and so, you have to read this book. Promise me you'll read this so we can talk about it first thing Monday morning. And they're like, wait a minute, you're telling me to read a book? Okay. And I've had teachers come to me like at some of these conventions with like tears in their eyes talking about some kid that had just turned them into a reader and they've read it like 10 times and couldn't wait for class act to come out and they talk about it. um, that to me is about as special as you can feel as an author.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. And what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that?
um, well, it's a little different these days because in some instances, the way that our society is now, so many people are looking to be offended by something, you know. So we will go through this with a fine tooth comb and like, okay, is that offensive? Is that gonna, um, and so that is the one part that's not fun. But everything else, including staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning, has been a blast. You know, Having kids mail me fan letters and drawings, having parents send me. So there's this uh, little redheaded girl from Middle America dressed up as Drew. So dressed up here with the purple shirt rolled up just like that. And I'm like, wow, because I don't know if you have that awareness if you're not African American, but like, my sons wore, Wimpy Kid shirts and Charlie Brown shirts and Harry Potter shirts and whomever. But traditionally, you don't see white kids wearing black characters on their shirts. Like there aren't many black characters that are make it to the level of a Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, a Wimpy Kid, you know. So to see all different kinds of kids, um, dressed as Jordan Banks for Halloween or dressed like Drew, um, is just something that I have never seen. And the fact that I have created those characters that have inspired kids where they feel that kind of camaraderie and see mirrors in themselves that they actually emulate the characters is like, you know, that kind of thing. Just mind blowing.
That's wonderful. What has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
So my favorite kind of silly story is I think I was at the NCTE National Convention, so that's National Council of Teachers of English, and this is like one of my first big signings. And I get to the HarperCollins booth, and the line is, I'm like, oh man, I'm like, here I am about to do my sign. I'm supposed to go on at 12, and some, this line is blocking my booth. I'm like, it's probably Kwame Alexander or Jason Reynolds, you know, and no one is going to know that I'm signing because this line is wrapping around, blocking my booth. So I'm going to sign like two books. And, because I knew Laurie House Anderson had a sign there. I was like, oh, the timing couldn't be worse. So I go up, kind of dejected to whoever's in the back of the line. I was like, excuse me, ma'am. Like, who are you here to see? And she's like, we're here to see you. And I'm like, this is my line? It's like, yeah. Didn't even dawn on me, that this like wraparound line was there to see me because I can't tell you how many hundreds of those lines I have stood on um, in the past to get Jeff Kinney's autograph or, like I said, Laurie Halse Anderson's autograph or Jared Krzyzewski's autograph or Meg Medina, and to think that I now had that line, I had reached that level was like pretty amazing. Very humbling also.
All right. And now, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
The greatest lesson is how much representation matters. I get emails that are like, my son or daughter found this like really little detail that can, Mom, look, this is like me. I'm in the book. That I just put in just, oh yeah, hey, let me do this. Um, like kids are just starving for that. And I think, again, it's not just the diversity, but it's diversity within the diversity, meaning not just having uh, kids of color, but in stories, but not having the same historical stories that I grew up with. Just to give another thing. Just like when there weren't a lot of, girls as the protagonist, that doesn't mean do another 5,000 mermaid books or princess books. It's like, hey, this is young Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or hey, this is a girl that's going to be a nuclear physicist. So having diversity within that diversity is as equally important as just, having the diversity at all.
Mm-hmm. So, what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers?
Um, like find what's different and special of your life and use as basis, like, you don't always, yes, everyone wants to be part of a trend to a degree, but for a while when every other book was dystopian book about the destruction of society and only two kids can save them. And, like I never jump on bandwagons like that. I would try to create my own, bandwagon, my own thing where it's just like, yeah, I'm not doing I'm in love with a vampire, that's just my thing. Obviously, you know, those people have mansions now because people love that. I love a vampire and I'm a werewolf kind of story. And again, not a knock at all, but by the time it is like a fad, then I look to do something else.
Okay. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that have helped you in your career?
Um, like now I have um seen organizations like SCBWI. I didn't necessarily grow up with them, but Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators seems to be very active. And I had been a member of the National Cartoonist Society for a while, and yeah, that's kind of it, because I just when I'm drawing, it's nonstop. Like I said, 15 hours a day, um, and the traveling. I just almost kind of kept to doing the conventions, like it might be Texas Teen Book, or NCTE or ALA or that kind of thing. So sometimes I was so pressed for time that I didn't sign up for other stuff, because I needed to just focus and be in a good headspace to finish the next book.
Okay. Now I have some questions about you as a person.
Okay,
What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
that when I was a kid, I absolutely hated to read.
Really?
Oh my goodness, it was a punishment. Like it would put me to sleep immediately. Like I read to get a good grade in school, but I was literally an adult before I sat down with like a big book, like a 400-page book. Like I'm going to read this as enjoyment. I could read, like I could read a 500-page book on Adobe Photoshop or real estate investing or something like that. But I always read for information, but I never read for enjoyment until I was an adult, and I never really read for enjoyment until I had sons, and then that was when I read like The Wizard of Oz for the first time, or Bud Not Buddy, or Holes, or kind of some of these classic books. But with the exception of reading Marvel comics as a kid, reading was never fun for me as a kid.
So, what's your favorite book?
Um, so that's a good question. So, like Holes and Bud Not Buddy have a special place because I read those to my sons. Octopus Stew is a really good picture book written by my buddy Eric Velasquez, who also illustrated it. I am a big Renee Watson fan. Piecing Me Together was one of my favorites. American Streets by E.B. Zaboy, and Elizabeth Acevedo with The Fire on High is one of my favorites. And of course, Kwame Alexander, because I have to say him or else he'll get mad. Uh, and Jason Reynolds and Jackie Woodson. Like, the more authors I meet, and then I'm like, oh, I have to read their book because I'm going to do a panel with them, you know. And then so that, even sometimes I'll do an audio book because I can listen while I draw. And then I'll get the book because I'm still a big kid. I still like my book signed. Stay online to get Jerry Kosheshka to sign "Hey Kiddo" like 5 times and stuff like that. And again, the Raina Telgemeier, I'm a big graphic novel fan too, Victoria Jameson.
Mhm.
So
So, what finally did get you to read? I mean, just your sons having to read with your sons?
what's weird? So the first book I remember reading and enjoying was probably 12th grade. That was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, because like it was the first time it was about a kid, and he had expectations to like make something out of his life, where it wasn't just a kid just trying to live to the last page. So that was kind of weird. Like, wow, no one dies, and he actually, you know. Um, and then I remember as an adult, um, meeting an author, and he's like, "Hey, let's swap books." I was like, "Oh, okay." So I gave him a copy of this, my Mama's Boys book, and he sent me 2 copies of his book, which were like 400 pages. And I was like, shoot, now I got to read these. And I didn't even know who the guy was. It turned out it was Eric Jerome Dickey, who's a New York Times bestselling author. He's written like 30 books. And then I was like, oh man, he's gonna go through my book. Like, this is great. What do you think of my book? So I was like, oh, I have to read his book now. So I was working. Uh, I lived in Connecticut. I worked in New York City, so I would commute every day. So I'd have like an hour going in when I'd read, an hour coming back, and then I was like, hey, I'm actually doing this, and I'm enjoying it. This is kind of interesting. And then I started going back as an adult and thinking like, all the books that I had kind of missed out on that people had told me about. And I kind of went and kind of caught up on that. And then as I started going, having relationships with bookstores and librarians, hey, have you read this? Oh, you got to read this. And then, like I said, once I started meeting authors, then it was really like nonstop.
Right. So, what question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
That's a tough one. I get asked so much stuff. You know, I think, the advice to kids is always a good one, but I get asked that a lot. Um, like, I think really whenever I get to talk about the lack of like iconic African American characters, because in my life, there's been like Fat Albert,
Hmm.
and that was like 50 years ago, you know? Um, but I can't say like a non-superhero, like now there's Black Panther and Miles Morales, but that's even really been popular the last, 5, 6 years. But my whole life, there was no wimpy kid, for me, that looked like me, I should say. Um, and I think whenever I get to talk about how important that is and what a big hole there is, where kids like, my sons, even take them to the movies when they were younger, you know, like, hey, dad, can we go to the movies? Like, oh, yeah, let's see if there's any movies where people look like us. And it was like, The Butler, The Help, 12 Years a Slave, Selma. Like, there just was no Wimpy Kid movie or a Narnia movie, you know.
Mhm.
So, when Wrinkle in Time came out, I think my son was like 19 and we still went to see it, sitting with the popcorn, like, wow, there's a black kid on stage on the screen and she's not dead yet and the movie's half over. Like it's just, you just don't realize what a vacuum there is, I think, unless people point it out. And then, oh, well, black kids don't like to read. Like, well, we don't have the same books for us, where, like when my kids were in school, every kid in their class was walking around with Wimpy Kid. It's like, did he get a new one? Did he get a new one? And to the point where my sons were like, Dad, we have to go to the store on July 7th. I'm like, oh, like GameStop to buy like the new Gears of War or Halo? What are you talking like? The new Wimpy Kid is coming out. And I'm like, you know when a book is coming out? Like that was the most shocking thing I'd ever heard, that a kid knew when, especially one of my kids, knew of a book birthday. The only book birthday I'd ever known was when New Kid came out, February 5th, Class Act, October 5th. That's the only book birthdays I was ever aware of. Um, so yeah, so that's, something I enjoy talking about and hoping that it would, change things a little bit.
Okay. So what are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time for your hobbies, and things that you love?
What's a hobby?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I like to travel when we could travel. So much of my life is is built around writing and drawing. I'd be drawing till 3 o'clock in the morning, talking to Eric Velasquez on the phone while he's writing and drawing till 3 o'clock in the morning. I would get invited to, you know, NCTE or ALA, and I'd be drawing on the plane or the train, and I'd get there and I'd do a panel with other artists, and I'd go back to my hotel room and I'd draw some more, go out to a restaurant. So eating. But I guess just hanging out with my sons, my youngest son and I still like to shoot hoops. We watch a lot of shows together. When the Marvel movies come out, we're first in line. Um, but other than that, I don't really have a lot of downtime because I found that even like watching the a basketball game on TV, I'm signing 300 book plates, you know. So I'm like this. So I almost never, and it may not even be a good thing, but I just almost never have like downtime, you know. Uh, and so far that's okay, you know. Helps meet the deadlines. I can't sleep at night sometimes because I have so many stories and Maury should come in and do this and Jordan should do this and Drew. Um, but I'm happy and I enjoy doing it. So
Do you write your ideas down or do you just have them in your head?
um I have them in my head until I have so many seeds in my head, and when they start to germinate a little bit and sprout, then I'll write them down so I don't forget.
Right.
But, other than that, it's probably like a gumball machine. If I shake my head too hard, you'll hear all the the seeds moving around. Um, but yeah, because otherwise I don't want to like start writing stuff down because then I'll just start to do that and I'll get distracted and do that. And it's like, oh wait, I was working on that, but wait, so
Isaac
that's kind of,
Asimov used to write like 5 books at one time. So.
oh yeah, I tried, I think, two at once. I don't, yeah, I mean, I could do that because sometimes if I'm silly, I could do feeling silly, do, the sillier book and then this. So that way I always feel like working on something. But five, my head would actually explode.
I couldn't believe
Yeah.
that. I could see him doing that. Anyway, so what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
The writing space, I've got like a double monitor. Everything is on my computer. I write on my computer and I draw on my computer. I draw on this is a Wacom uh, Intuos Pro, and I draw with this stylus in the program called Adobe Photoshop. Um, Writing, I don't need a lot. I may take my laptop and sit in my backyard. Um, when I'm drawing, then I can focus and I can put on either an audiobook or I can pull up Netflix on my other screen so that, and that's part of the reason why, especially if it's a good show, like, and I look like, wow, I watched 5 episodes. The season's over. Like, wait a minute. If I've been sitting here for 5 hours, what time is it? 5 a.m. you know, but that just helps to kind of pass the time and it just is comfortable. I don't think you write well if you're not comfortable. So if your chair is not comfortable, get rid of all the pens in your house that don't work that you got to keep clicking. If there's something that's off or you're sitting at an awkward angle, make sure you have enough light, you know. Um, you want to make it as comfortable as possible, and then I think that things just kind of flow a little better.
So do you prefer having noise around you or silence when you're writing?
When I'm writing, I like silence. When I'm drawing, I like talking on the phone or watching the show or something.
So you're multitasking then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And what about food or drink or things like that? What do you have with you?
I tend to have like I try to do healthier things. so I don't get my, so I didn't get my like COVID-15 or my, so I've got like cashews and dates and walnuts and things like that. Um, I've been really good. There's been a thing of cookies there that I probably should throw out, but if I throw them out, I'll buy more because I feel like I should have cookies. But just knowing that I have them, just safe in case I want to fall off the wagon. Um, and then I just try to drink water. My sons and I juice a lot, so I'll do something like that just to kind of, because the schedule is really grueling going through airports, and then I go places, and for some reason, and it's great, but kids, I'm like, I'm not this big author. I'm like, hey, it's him. Like they always say my whole name. It's never Mr. Kraft. It's Jerry Kraft. Hey, Jerry Kraft. Hey, Jerry Kraft. And it'd be like, hey, Jerry Kraft, you play basketball? Like, yeah. You want to 1v1 me? I'm like, what? Do I want do I want to 1v1? You mean you want me to go out to the court and play you in basketball? Like, no, I can't do that. I'm going on stage in a half hour. You scared? All right. Tie comes off, shirt comes off. Go out and whip some kid in basketball, and then go back in and dry it off, put the tie back on, and you know, and then the kid, oh, who won? Who won? I'm like, oh, well, why don't you ask him who won? So I feel like I need to stay in shape because there's always some kid gunning for me.
You get a lot of challenges, huh?
I do for some reason. Yeah. Yeah, but like when I would do an all-day school visit in person, um, there are kids, like I would go out at recess. A lot of the teachers go, okay, well, you need some downtime, we can hide you in the mailroom with a sandwich. And I'm like, no, recess, like, what are they doing? They playing football? I'm going to my car, get my sneakers. I'm gonna play some football with them because they remember that, and it shows them
Yeah.
that I'm a real person. I used to be a real kid, not like authors like made in some laboratory and all I did was read and had books downloaded directly into my brain and stuff like that. I'm like, I played Xbox and PlayStation. The games are a little too complicated for me now, but I used to give out my gamer tag and, you know, whip them in some PlayStation. Like, okay, well, that's from Mr. Kraft. Good luck.
Okay. Writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do they help or hinder you?
Well, yeah, come here. Uh, come here. All right, here's one. Get up here. Uh, uh, so I have a matching set. Uh,
Oh,
I have a
yes, you
matching
do.
set of beagles.
Oh,
So Snoopy and Dexter. And this one, Dexter, is pretty good. Snoopy, as I'm drawing, if I'm not petting him enough, will come and hit my elbow with his nose until I stop to pet him. But yeah, this one is actually has a mind of his own, and he'll just sleep. So they've both been sleeping in my studio this whole time.
so do they hinder you when you're writing?
Only if I have not paid attention to them in a while, or if they hear something outside, then they'll scratch on the door to get up, and I'll open up the door to let them out and close the door, and then a couple minutes later, scratch on the door to get in. Oh, you've heard this story before? Is that what's going on?
I think we're boring him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry, I woke you. Um, so that kind of thing. And but they are good because I do have to get up sometime and stretch because I literally can sit for like okay, for like 6 hours at a time and not realizing that I'm sitting for 6 hours. Yep. So that is it. Yep.
And
So that's my dog life.
that's great. How important has the New England setting been to your writing?
Um, Not so much the writing, but my Massachusetts has been absolutely amazing. Like I feel like I've done every school in Massachusetts. Um, uh, and that's kind of cool. And it's been really amazing. I do like the seasons, so I try to make sure that I will put in snow or rain, like in New Kid, like I'll have like the seasons changing, that kind of thing. So that's been pretty cool. Um, but the other thing that is on those cold Connecticut days, if I don't have to leave the house, I may be in for a week. I may do a big shopping thing so I don't have to leave, and then I am just working.
Okay. Um, Now, I only have two more questions for you. One is, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? Though they should totally check here first. And I'm going to give a
Yes.
little plug. If you would like Class Act, New Kid, or any of Jerry's other books, you can call us at 508-796-5613, and we can order them for you, or you can come into the store,
Yep.
or you can send us email at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. So
Yep.
where else can people get
I
your
am a
books?
big independent bookstore person. So I always encourage my readers to check for their local indie place and stop by.
Okay, great. And how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Everything is very simple. It's just my name. So jerrycraft.com is my website. Um, and all through social media, it's just Jerry Craft. There's nothing complicated. So I'm on Twitter. I have a Facebook fan page. I'm on Instagram. I'll pop in the clubhouse every once in a while. Yeah, not too much on Pinterest.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. This was wonderful, and I'm sure I hope we'll be seeing you at the store sometime when COVID is all over. I hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it was great talking to you.
Same here.
Okay,
Thank you.
so thanks again.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too.